Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now we're here today on location at Warwick Castle, where I used to work. I was the first Warwick bowman. And what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a tour through my eyes of my old castle. This isn't just any old tour. We're going to discover some secrets here today because I've got exclusive access to the hidden corners, forgotten tunnels and locked rooms that most visitors never get to see. Now, for starters, this used to be the entrance, the front door to the castle. Everybody goes across the old bridge there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to the beginning of the castle, where it all started, to the motte and the bailey. So this is the beginning of Warwick Castle. We're just probably less than a quarter of the way up the motte, raised in 1068 under the orders of William the Conqueror, just 2 years after the Battle of Hastings, 1066. When the motte was raised, it's right the way up the top there. Norman troops didn't do this. They supervised. Your local Saxons were actually at work, because there was a Saxon settlement at Warwick. Ethelfled, she was the one who actually founded it. But the Normans have won. Hastings is over. Now they are going to settle the country. So in strategic places, they had the motte, these high mounds built, then a wooden keep on the top, and then the bailey, which is pretty much the shape of the castle today. But there's a little gem here, something I used to love when I used to shoot across the River Avon. 90-yard shot they were quite some fun. But it's this little tower here that I want to show you. As early as 1260, the castle is being rebuilt in stone, and there was a tower that was built here. And it's just wow, because people miss it. It's really quiet. The castle's packed. Everybody's getting ready for the trebuchet display. But we're here. Nobody else is here, because this is one of your little secrets of Warwick Castle. Let's go and have a closer look. What used to be here? Was this a lintel for a doorway? Was there something behind there which they've blocked up? I love to ask these questions, and very often people, I can't answer that. But this is the entrance to the Watergate Tower. Upstairs is the level of the courtyard, and you come down a spiral staircase and you come out of here. They used to keep boats here. This was their access out to the River Avon, and of course it's a defensive position. You can close it off. This was built because it was originally a bit of a blind spot, but now with a double multi-level tower, it's a well-defended part of the castle, which could also act as a sally port. It's great. It's one of those little secrets. Nobody comes up here. They don't look inside there and see. They just see, oh, it's an old door. Anyway, we're going to head back over to the main entrance now, to the gatehouse, where our tour really begins. Here we are on the east front, the lawn in front of Warwick Castle. I have shot thousands of arrows across this bank here. It's quite something. But when you look at the fabric at the castle, 28 meters tall, Guy's Tower. It's incredible when you think about it. It's literally built on the bedrock there. Your battlements come across. But there's an interesting little twist. If you look in the corner here, you can see arrow slits that actually go into the bank. And the reason being, 1641, I understand, the castle was refortified, ready for cannons. So this embankment here, and then a gun emplacement on the edge of Guy's Tower, was installed. And the ditch would have been a lot deeper. It's interesting when you start to look at it, because there was a drawbridge here. Then this gatehouse that we see jutting out, that's an addition, because there was another drawbridge inside, if I remember correctly. And on the other side, you can see there's a building that juts out just in front of Caesar's Tower. Well, that was added in the 1600s. It was believed to have been a wash house or a brew house, where they brewed the ale. And let's face it, a castle of this size would have needed plenty of ale. And then the Caesar's Tower behind it, the quatrefoil tower, that's actually 40 meters high. And the reason being is it goes right down past the castle to the ground level at Mill Street, where it's actually built from the bedrock up. So it's not always as you think. People come in, they go, oh right, it's amazing bank, and look at this, look at that. But in fact, it was different. Additions, always adding, always changing. But let's go and have a look inside the gatehouse. So, drawbridge here. So the drawbridge would raise up against. You can still see where the workings used to go through into the capstan room above. So, great big drawbridge. Closes against here. Portcullis, still raised and lowered every night. I think that's brilliant. And then the massive oak doors. And you can see the size of the doors would have been, not just by the shape here, but also by the iron hinges that go here. And then murder holes, real ones. So boiling sand, rocks, anything you can think of coming down, but not your boiling oil from Hollywood. Boiling sands the stuff gets down inside the armour. It's an interesting thing about portcullis. So it's levered gate. When they're down, they were actually locked in position. You couldn't lift them up. You couldn't get these burly Hollywood actors to actually lift it up and let people through. They were locked in place. And you've got to look for the little signs. Just back here, this is where the doors would open and would actually be latched onto. You still have the fixings here. So as we move on through the gatehouse, people, you know, when I worked here, people used to say, well, what's this for? Is this where the guard stands on duty? Well, the guard, if he's in the way or anybody's in the way and there's a carriage coming in, so we understand, he could sit or stand here away from the wheels. So you have the porter's lodge and guard room. That's what we think these rooms were actually for. But then as you come underneath here, another row of murder holes. But if you want to advance, if you want to take this gatehouse, so you've battered everything through, you're here. You've now got to run a gauntlet. You've got to get from here undercover. And a long time ago, there was another drawbridge here. So you've got to take this outer gatehouse, then you've got to take the inner gatehouse. But there's a lovely little bit here that I love. This has always been one of my secret favourite bits, if you like. People walk past it. I've always said sharpening for the arrows, sword tips, arrows. But modern historians, they dispute this because these are often found at the entrances to churches. And they say it's either a religious thing or folk medicine, the sandstone being used. But it doesn't fit here. This is the military end of the castle. This is where they did have their swords, they did have their arrows, and they walked just to the front of the castle because that's where the butts were, the actual archery butts. So this makes sense to me because I've actually put medieval arrowheads in here and they fit absolutely perfect. So in churches, all right, I'll give you that, it can be something else. But here, I reckon this is where the soldiers on duty, either bored or ready for fighting, would actually sharpen their gear. And they left some of their marks as well on here because there's the remains of just a tiny little bit of graffiti there. So one of those wonderful things that we find here at Warwick Castle. I love it. But as we move further up, I remember coming out with an audience going for my archer show, and just up there, this is covered now, it's part of the dungeon experience. But it used to be open, this walkway, and there was a beautiful young lady with long blonde hair, and her hair was cascading over the edge just there, and all the people are behind me, and I'm dressed like this Warwick bowman chap, and I stopped, and I looked at her, and I said, "But soft, what light from yon window breaks?" And I gave the whole Shakespearean stuff. And when I'd finished, I doffed my cap, and this girl looked at me chewing her gum and went, "What's this guy talking about, Ma?" And all you heard from behind was, "Oh," because it was my best bit of Shakespeare. But she had no idea. It was just one of those things that happen when you're on duty at Warwick Castle. But let's go into the main gatehouse now. So don't forget, there's a drawbridge closed here. So if you've got to take it, you've got to get that drawbridge down. Not only that, if you have a look right up above, all around the battlements there, They're going to be dropping rocks on you. They're going to be shooting you in the back from the battlements up there. And even when you get through, great big portcullis. This one's even bigger than the front portcullis. And then behind, a double row of murder holes. As far as I know, nobody ever got through here. This, probably one of the best double gatehouses in the country. I love it. Just look at the size that the doors would have been. They've got 3 sets of hinges closing right up against there. There would have been put lugs to lock it all in. Those doors must have been absolutely phenomenal. And then you've got more rooms, entrances into the towers, and you emerge into this quite wonderful courtyard. But there's more to explore. We're going to delve into a little bit of a darker history. Let's have a look at the old prison, shall we? You know, something I've learnt on revisiting Warwick Castle after all these years is the history of it hasn't stood still. They are constantly looking at different parts of the castle. Did this really happen? What is this actually for? And this jail, as it's now called, in my day was always the dungeon. But in fact, now they've done some more research, historians have been at it. It's more of a storeroom and a jail than a medieval dungeon. So we're going to get out and have a little look. And it makes sense for it to be a storeroom. Ice cold, freezing cold. Great place to keep your supplies. Let's go down and have a look. And I love the sign because there's a little incident here where somebody was reading the sign and nearly knocked themselves out. But I stopped a man who got a child on the back of his head with one of these seats. Just a lovely little baby. And I said to him, look, when you go in, I said, you will duck your head, but please, you've got to stoop down because of the baby. He said, and he came here and I'm watching. I said, don't forget. And he looked at me and he stooped down, and as he stooped down, he knocked the baby out. Poof, just like that. And so that was one of those little incidents where people just don't listen. I didn't laugh at first. Let's go down and have a look. You know, the Civil War, this was a prison, it was a jail. And there's a story where they threw a man down the steps, broke his legs, and he was the wrong guy. 6 weeks he was down there. When they got him out, he died. That's just a local story. So, although it's not a medieval dungeon as we think, there is some real horror, some sadness down here. So let's investigate. So it makes sense, going back to the medieval times, that this was the medieval fridge. Best place in the castle to keep your meat hanging. It is freezing down here. It really is. Now, as I mentioned upstairs about the way that they continually research the history. So when I worked here, there was a lot made of this room, this chamber down below, the oubliette. So legend has it, the oubliette was a prison within a prison where you put somebody to rot and to die. It's the forgotten place, oubliette, forgotten. But researchers shown that the oubliette is more of a legend, didn't really exist. This they found, and Ben, who works here, has actually crawled down that hole. He guarantees me that there's lots of spiders down there. This is connected to the toilet system, the garderobe system. That flushes right the way out into the river. And don't forget, across the top of this, there would have been a wooden toilet seat. You wouldn't have to hover with your backside above that terribly cold draft. I reckon you wouldn't hover very long in there anyway. You'd want to get your business done. So when this place became a prison at the Civil War period, it makes sense that they would use this as the toilet. But I will tell you now, my fingers are freezing. I'd forgotten just how cold and damp this place is. And some prisoners were kept in here for years. Especially, it would seem, during the Civil War, your Catholic prisoners. Beautiful carvings of crosses here. This was their altar. They're all the way over. But there is quite a remarkable thing. You know, I'm a Christian lad, and I pray. And these guys who've been through hell of the fighting, and now they're living in sheer hell, would look up at that tiny little window, the sun coming through, and they would say their prayers. But there's another piece. It's hidden now by the sign because it has literally faded almost away. But we've got what it said. Master John Smythe, gunner to His Majesty Highness, was a prisoner in this place and lay here from 1642. Poor old Master John Smythe, a gunner. That makes him equivalent of an engineer. He's a valuable prisoner. He either comes onto your side or you don't let him go. Well, he died in this miserable, fetid pit. From storeroom to chamber of horror. If these walls could speak, what would they say? Gosh. The one thing that drew me back to Warwick Castle as an adult was actually the Kingmaker exhibition. And before we even go down, look at the new sign. Painted coat of arms and the bear and ragged staff. Now, as a Warwickshire lad, that was big in my childhood, the bear and the ragged staff. But what we're going to do, we're going to go through and I'll show you some of my favourite bits of the Kingmaker. But my advice to you is, if you want to have a good look, come and visit the castle, get one of the deals. Come down and have a look at the Kingmaker yourself. It's fabulous. The Kingmaker exhibition, it's actually a story. Richard Neville, his legend name, the Kingmaker. And as you go through, you see his army preparing for war, and you meet him. And he's down here, and he's been armoured up. This is brilliant, because here you have a squire arming up Richard Neville. You can see all of the points, the cords hanging down, because the armour's attached to the knight by all of these cords. You can actually see that his squire has got one of the points, as they're called, because of the metal tips on the end, in his hand. And this is where we supposedly get the saying, get to the point. Hurry up, boy, get to the point. Get this armour on. These guys could be stood there putting all the armour on, making sure it all works perfect. Because don't forget, if they get it wrong in the battle, the knight might have his arm jammed, it might not work. If his armour's rusted up, he can't bend his knees. It'll cost him his life. So the armour has to be burnished bright, oiled correctly, and fit perfectly. If you wanted a suit of let's say, Milanese armour, then you would have an effigy of yourself made in wax, a second best clothes put on it, and then off it would go with your men to Milan. Their armour would be fitted to it. Your men would make sure it worked. The only problem is your noble earl must make sure that he doesn't put on weight, because literally a king's ransom will be spent on a good suit of Milanese armour. So this has to be my favourite room, obviously. You got an arrow wagon. You got a young bowman there with his trade shooting the apple. The bowman here fletching, sorting out their kit. You've got the cat whose head moves every now and again. It would stick. But this just shows the pavise, the wagons. If you see any of my other films, I do a lot about logistics. And here you see arrows ready, put into the bags for transportation. I can only say that that young lad's arms must really ache, because he's had that arrow at the full draw, I think, for about 40 years. Now, I'm not going to take you all the way through the Kingmaker, but I will tell you a couple of the secrets relating to it. So the exhibition was created by Madame Two Swords, and every one of the figures is actually modelled on a real person who used to work for the Two Swords company. So staff that were working here could come along and see themselves cast in wax. So they call this the wardrobe, and you've got people doing various jobs. It's showing you the domestic side of the castle. But I brought you in here because of the ceiling. Have a look up. This is 14th century, and it is perfect. It's as good now as it ever was. These were bedrooms for high status people who were visiting or moving through the castle. And it is literally as if it's just been made a few years ago. But there's more to see. Follow me. So this is the finale of the Kingmaker, and you have his officers and the Kingmaker himself. And this is a great opportunity to show all of the different kinds of armour, the helmets, but also the different soldiers. But one of my favourite parts is actually over here in the corner. This is a garderobe, but what they've done is they've actually put a toilet seat on it so you can see. That's what they used to look like. That's what people would sit upon. But there's an interesting thing. Just underneath here is another layer of Warwick Castle, and it's sealed off. When I worked here, they lowered a camera down, they had a look. There are mirror image rooms, but there hangs a little bit of a mystery. You see, in the wardrobe and also here, there has been a shadowy figure seen. Some people would say an apparition, other people, it's a ghost. So I was asking the manager then, in those days, Sarah, I was asking about the sighting of the ghosts, and she says, the interesting thing, that shadow always appears to be going down. And where the shadow has mostly been seen was where there used to be a spiral staircase going down to the lower level. Is it a ghost? Is it imagination? Or is it still the heartbeat of the castle pumping away? I love these stories. So you've got this medieval corridor here. It holds the castle up. But the way it's been decorated, when they put in the Kingmaker exhibition, the historians researched this mural and decided this is quite possibly what would have been here. And as you can see, it's a wonderful job. It just is lovely. There's no other way to describe it. And it shows that the castles weren't just bare walls and miserable and cold places. People lived here. So we're back in the courtyard, but we're actually standing on centuries of kitchen floors, living room floors. There were houses up against the battlement walls. And there is evidence as to exactly where the kitchen might have been. Have a look at this over here. Fireplace. Now, up on the top of the battlements, I'll try and show you later, there is actually a chimney breast. And people walk past it without knowing that it was a chimney. So somebody could be cooking here. A nice black and white timbered house all the way along. And you've got another one just here. There you go. That's the great big mantle stone. You can see where the fireplace has been bricked up. But of course, we're quite high up now. The courtyard has been raised for the landscaping. There is so much still down there. Little bits that have been dropped. And as you come round, you get a better view of some larger fireplaces. So were the houses over here a little bit more high status, upmarket. Big fireplace, obviously a lot deeper down. And your next door neighbour, fireplace, the hearthstone has gone, but the fireplace itself still exists. And the chimneys went all the way up to the top. And some interesting little things, some extra stones that have been plugged in. And they are one of those lovely little secrets, because if you build a house against the castle walls, how are you going to fix it? How come it won't fall away? Well, this is one of the few surviving beams from the houses. The beams actually went right in. You can see there. You've got that hole there, and then you've got another hole that's been plugged. So this must have been the edge of the house. It's quite lovely what you find, and there is a dog kennel there, but that's Victorian apparently. But there is another story. So you've got the Victorian dog kennel here, but in the mid 19th century, Anne Greville, the 4th Countess of Warwick, she used to have monkeys chained by the gatehouse there to entertain guests who were coming in. And apparently one of them escaped, went down to Mill Street and climbed down a chimney and frightened the headmaster's wife half to death as the monkey simply appeared out of the chimney breast. I think that's brilliant. But even today, locals who live right next to the castle, they don't get to live right next to Warwick Castle and just have nothing happen, because now we have the peacocks. They're always on the outside of the castle, sitting in people's gardens and creating a right row. And people complain, but the thing is, you buy a house next to a castle, what do you expect? So you had your rows of houses along here, a domestic range, but you can see the large pieces of stone sticking out just below the walkway there. Those are corbels, and what they were for is the support, the upright support for the roof that used to be over the top of the battlements. It's all part of your machicolations, where they used to extend onto the outside and overhang the battlements. So anybody who's attacking, all they can see is these wooden hoardings and things, very small arrow slits for the crossbowmen, and then of course they could drop things down on your head. The evidence is still here for the medieval castle. Now, all of these little pock marks that you can see, I may have already mentioned that some of it is from where there was ivy, but there's an interesting piece. There was a hit here, an explosion. I reckon it was from the Civil War, and you can see where all the fragments actually burst out, and you can see the strike mark in the middle. There's a plug stone being put in. You can see when that's the centre of the explosion. So the history is literally written on the castle walls. And that's especially true when you look inside the locked rooms of Guy's Tower. I actually did a dedicated video about the graffiti a while back, but here's a small taster of one of Warwick Castle's secrets. Follow me. Do you know, we're really lucky to be here. This is a room that's closed to the public. It is a medieval room that's been untouched. Look at the ceilings, the windows. It's just incredible. In fact, this little room here, blow your mind. Look how worn the step is. And you may have guessed, if you come this end, it is the garderobe. And apparently it still works. And this, you know, to a lot of people, they'd look at, oh yeah, it's just a fireplace, the medieval fireplace, and it's the original. Look at the size of the mantle stone here. It's quite wonderful, but these rooms are precious. I know they're closed and you can't normally come in here, but they can't put them on display because they're so delicate. But every castle is the same. It has its hidden secrets. But let's have a look at this little bedroom in here. There were prisoners in here during the Civil War, 1642 and on. Those prisoners were royalist prisoners. They would sit by the window and they made tiny little stick figure drawings of cavalry men on horseback.
They're everywhere. Everywhere you go. Little drawings of the birds, where men, prisoners, have been sat here gazing out of the window. But one of the things that I first saw in this room, which blew my mind, was this little bit of graffiti here. The beautiful script, the carving of the individual letters. But it doesn't match the Civil War carvings. So it's not until you come around and look on the opposite side, there is a masterpiece. Now, I was informed that this is medieval, and it was a cross between French and Latin, but it's been transcribed. They don't know if it was written or carved by a priest or a prisoner, but what it says is, Hail Mary, Mother of Grace. So it's a prayer carved in to the living stone. And that's what I love about this castle. It has a beating heart, hundreds of years old, in fact 1,000 years old, and it still beats to this very day. It's magic. It really is. Let's go and explore.
So we've been granted special access. Nobody's been through here for decades. We're going to have a look at the mound from above. It's just wonderful. So some of this stonework, the parapet, is pre-Civil War. But come the Civil War, they've reinforced it. Yeah, you've got it so it's been strengthened and you have a kind of a battlement. But much later, they extended it so the Earl here, the Lord of the house, could take his friends on a little extended walk across the top of the mound so they could view his estate across Warwickshire. Isn't that wonderful? I can look out of my back window and view my estate in one blink. So we've just come up the top of these stairs. The public aren't allowed up here, and it's understandable why, because we've suddenly emerged into a room at the top of the mound. But it had doors, fireplace, windows. So this was some form of, I suppose you could call it a domestic tower, but actually we think it was a guard room or a watch room for the watcher. And then you've got a curious little piece here. We've got a gun port. So anybody who's attacking up the mound or is over the bottom there, you've actually got them within range. In fact, this covers what is now the island. Wow, some things I've not seen. And you got some modern graffiti here, 1960, 1970. People do like to leave their mark. Oh, look. But I didn't do it. Honest. You know, if you look just how high up we are, just look at the vantage point here. There's the town of Warwick. There's St Mary's on top of the hill. And if you bring it all the way round, what a commanding view you have up here. Now, the battlements we're actually standing on, some people call them a folly. You know, it's adding to the fairy tale look of the castle, but come the Civil War, these were here. So musketeers, gunners were up here because one of the attacks the royalists actually did on the castle was they scaled the mound and they were shot to pieces. So all of the attacks on the castle in that time, 1642, failed, and they failed with, you know, terrible loss of life as these men tried their hardest to get in. It's interesting, if you look over to the old tower that was there, you can see all of the gun ports that have been blocked up just underneath the window. We saw that one from inside, and you can see the row of them on the outside. So it's great to be able to look down on the castle and see where you are, but there's things you can see from this angle that normally people wouldn't see. It's like looking down onto the Watergate Tower. In the centre you've got extended arrow slits at the top there. Then just to the right, and indeed in the centre in between the arrow slits and to the right, you can see blocked up circular holes. So the attack on the mound here would have been repelled by the gunners on top of the battlements here, but also by enfilade fire from the Watergate Tower. So in amongst all of the fairy tale, the weekend party, the dungeons and that wonderful kingmaker, the fabric of the castle itself tells the story, doesn't it? Tells the history. You just need to know where to look. We're actually stood in the ditch, or the moat if you like, of Warwick Castle. I think it was dry ditch defence because everything would have just flowed out into the river. And up on the top there are some of the original stonework of the 12th century battlements. And it was this part of the castle that was demolished 1264. And that was when the garrison from Kenilworth Castle was sent by Simon de Montfort to take this castle. But William Maudoy, who was the Earl at that time, he was a cowardly gentleman and he didn't want any problems. The attackers had brought trebuchets with them, and he simply said, "Oh, take the castle," and hid quivering under a table in the castle. He was taken. Then afterwards they actually demolished part of the wall, so it was indefensible. They couldn't use it. But what you look at now, just behind me, is the Bear Tower and then the Clarence Tower. These are gunnery towers. There was no entrance in between them. They were simply for artillery and for defence. Anybody attacking on the blind spots, they could no longer do it because they were covered by these two gunnery towers. Quite something. You know, something I was asked when I was here as the bowman is, if that's a gunnery tower, why is there a mound of earth here? Well, that's from the Civil War. So you've got protection from artillery against the walls, but also you can mount your own artillery positions on top, the field guns. So you have layer upon layer of history here at Warwick Castle. So we're going to go into Clarence Tower and we're going to eventually end up on the battlements, but we've managed to get access. A door has been opened. We're going to go inside and we're going to go down where the public are not allowed to go.
You can't find something, Nick. 1750.
Oh gosh. Doesn't matter where you go, graffiti. 1750. But now we have a door open and darkness below. I hope I don't tumble to my death. Oh my God. Because it's so dark, nobody comes down here. I've got a bit of a torch. There's lots of leaves, lots of debris down here, so bear with me. So, step at a time. Goodness me, this goes down quite a way. We're going below the surface of the courtyard, so we're going under the castle a little bit. And we have got to be careful because there are decades amounts of litter and leaves and stuff that have been dropped down here. So let's be careful. I thought that was a body then, but it's not, it's a bag of rubbish. Right. Okay, so here we are. We're actually under the castle, but unfortunately this tunnel entrance has been filled in, but this connected Clarence Tower to the Bear Tower. So during a siege, fighting, the men didn't have to go across the top. They simply went right underneath. And the legend is there's another tunnel, but it's never been found. So here we are, right underneath Warwick Castle. And I'll tell you now, it doesn't smell very nice. But that's history, isn't it? So we've just come up from the bowels of the earth underneath the castle here, and we're now onto Clarence Tower, the gunnery tower. And it just gives you a commanding view of the castle ditch, the gardens there. But if you were in combat, this is an absolute perfect position to be for anybody who's trying to sneak up the mound. So, you know, the earthworks here, mainly from the Civil War, where they would have had guns mounted on here and gun positions. So the whole fortress really did work. And these flanking towers, Bear and Clarence, are perfect. But we're now going to look up. And if you look up just there, it was always known as the Crow's Nest, where your lookout can actually see what's going on. There was a legend that once upon a time they called the time there, but I don't know if that's true or not. But we're going to go up onto the battlements and take a good look. This is the inside of the Crow's Nest. Not only is it a good position to shoot your bow or your musket, it does give you a view over the front part of the grounds there. Yeah, 5 o'clock and all's well. I wonder if they did, but there's something I like about these battlements. People miss it. Remember the fireplaces down below that I showed you? Built into the castle wall? Here is the chimney. Smoke will be billowing up out of here. Breakfast being cooked. And there's another one here. So can you imagine the sentry on duty marching up and down, having a look, see if there's a problem, and he comes past here and he can smell the lovely aroma of supper being cooked. People walk past, they have no idea, and yet here it is, the fabric of the castle. It's not just for fighting, people lived here. I love it. So here we are on the top of Guy's Tower, Warwick Castle. Used to be a favourite haunting place of mine. But if you go back to August 1642, the outbreak of the English Civil War, Charles I against Parliament's army. Well, Charles I's army, the Earl of Northampton's men, shall we say, lay siege to the castle. They poured down the narrow streets there, coming towards the castle. But what they didn't know is the garrison here knew they were coming. They'd mounted swivel guns and field pieces. They filled them full of dice shot and opened fire. This is where they mounted their wheeled field guns in. You can still see part of the rut, and there's another one down below where the guns recoiled and actually jammed against the wall. And this, of course, aimed straight at those narrow streets and the church. Those narrow streets very quickly became clogged with the dead of the Royalist army of the Earl of Northampton. And just to show you, quatrefoil arrow slits. These are brilliant, both for muskets and crossbowmen, because you can shoot all the way down, or you can shoot at an angle. And then around the top, you have got gaps here where you can drop boulders or boiling sand down on the besiegers. When you consider the cost of building this castle, the fabric of the castle, the Barbican and the gatehouse were actually built by the de Beauchamp family on the profit, on the proceeds from the 100 Years' War. So that's where a lot of the money went. These noblemen who fought at Agincourt, Crécy, Poitiers, they brought the profits back and they invested it in their castles. In fact, Caesar's Tower was once known as Poitiers Tower. So you've got to thank the French for the fabric, as we know it, of Warwick Castle. So when you come to Warwick Castle, you've got to tip a nod to those ancient families, and especially to the French, and say, merci beaucoup, les Français, pour mon château. So we're on the east front battlements now, which connect Guy's Tower to the Barbican. Here are the chimneys. They've been capped and blocked off. Another one here. And of course you would have had the uprights from the corbels coming here, then the sloping roof down for all of the hoardings that would have been built, so that you step through to fight on the outside of the battlements. Ooh, ooh, we're going up. So right on top of the gatehouse, and boy, what a view. You have a commanding view from all of the battlements here. So if anybody captures part of the battlements, you can shoot at them from the one side. This is quite an affair. Let's go down, have a look through the other side. We're going down this one. So you can see in the corner of the tower, it joins the wall, you can see a latrine tower. Now a person sitting upstairs could poop, and the poop will go down to the next stage until eventually it makes its way out into the ditch. You can see some of the lead chutes there. They're actually modern, and it just diverts the water. But it shows you how the system within the Barbican, where they could have dropped down the quicklime and the boiling sand and filthy sewage down on the enemy, didn't matter which direction they were from, because they had very similar chutes to this in the old days. And you'll see hooks on the outside of this building, and those are from the Civil War time, where they hung bales of fabric and straw, so if a cannon struck, it actually hit the coverings that were protecting the windows, deflecting the cannonballs from the windows. So you got Caesar's Tower behind me, 1350, it's the oldest tower, but what makes this special is the quatrefoil shape of it, and also the actual battlements, the machicolations around the bottom. It's multi-layered. So let's go and have a look. If you look up from here, you can see up through the walkway where they could drop things down upon you. So if the castle was captured, Caesar's Tower could close up and be the last bastion, as it were. It can support itself. But let's get in and have a look. Ow. We're going up again. Fascinating thing about this tower is we're not at the top. We're on the quatrefoil battlements just below the top, which give you this extra piece of fighting platform. But if you look down below, you can see the lovely mill gardens. So this quatrefoil, this clover shaped tower, is quite incredible. A gun port above your head there. There is so much to see, but it has that 360-degree fighting platform. But we're going to see if we can get a little bit higher. Another locked door has been opened. Let's have a look. Would you look at this? So this room hasn't been touched. Literally just got debris, planks and things left in. Public can't come in here, but you can still walk towards that window and you can see the incredible view that a gunner would have had. Any army approaching, they would have had them from here, because they could get a field gun up here. If I disappear, they can literally put a little plaque there, can't they? There's the fireplace. That's a medieval fireplace, right on the top of a tower. This was the guard room, very similar to the gunnery top, the guard room on the top of Guy's Tower. But here we are. And to me, it is just literally wow. Sealed up, can't be used for the public, but we've had access. Goodness. You know, you look at it now in its state. Hopefully one day in the future, they will be able to raise enough funds to refurbish these rooms, make them secure, so the public can come in. But I do know already as we speak, there is a tremendous amount of money is being spent in the house, restoring ceilings and restoring rooms back to what they used to be. But we'll have a look at those later on. Something I would like to do for myself and my wife in the future is hire 2 suites up here in Caesar's Tower. You can actually spend the night in luxury in Warwick Castle, and I think that is absolutely wonderful. So we're going to go into the Great Hall. We're going to do some more exploring, the more modern parts of the castle. However, there's been a Great Hall on this site since the 1300s, but this one's been rebuilt. It actually burnt down. Let's go and have a look. You know, when you look at this, you wouldn't believe that in 1871, this literally burnt to the ground. Stewards who were sleeping down below, they heard what they thought was hail, but it wasn't. It was the molten lead pouring off the roofs. The whole of the east wing was ablaze. When the roof came down, it actually extinguished the fire. So if we were stood here after the fire, we would see nothing but sky. And now look at it, rebuilt, an absolutely wonderful great hall. And of course you've got all of the weapons, all of the armour on all of the walls. There's one specific piece that I'd like to show you, just at the far end there. You either like him or you hate him. To me, he's an English hero. The death mask of Oliver Cromwell. And this helmet here, although they can't prove it, it's always been said, it's the legend. This was the helmet of Oliver Cromwell. Yeah? Look at this for a beautifully carved door. And we have permission to go through it and have a look behind the scenes at some of the renovation work that's taking place. So I harp on sometimes to when I worked at Warwick Castle. When I worked at Warwick Castle, this was the offices for the sales and all of that kind of stuff. And people would be bustling around and you missed all of the servant bells. Each one has a different sound. So a servant, a butler or a footman, he might hear that bell go, he knows exactly who it is before he even comes out and checks. Wow, yeah? But now, all of these old offices are being completely restored. And I can hardly recognise it. It's just beautiful. This caretakering of Warwick Castle. It's not just looking after it, it's putting bits back where they used to be. Have a look at that fireplace over there. Right, we're at the end of my day at Warwick Castle and it's been fantastic. And Jay here is one of the bowmen. You've got Noel the bowman, and then Jay has offered me a chance to have a last shot across the ditch at Warwick Castle. Now don't forget, this isn't my bow, they're not my arrows, I haven't got my gear. So that's the excuses. That's it, done with. I'm going to have a go, see if I can get anywhere near that helmet. But before I do, of course, so let's see how I can do. Right, I've got my own gloves here.
Perfect.
Oh, lessons learnt over the years.
Yes.
Tell me about it. So, how do you find it here with the crowds?
Do you know what, I enjoy it. I enjoy it awful lot. So yeah, you get two types of people here at the Castle. You get the people who really want to learn about the history, and you get the people who just want a good show. And with our work with Warwick Warriors over the years, we've kind of tried to do this, like it's entertainment. We're going to sneak that learning in at the same time and try and get people into it as much as we can. So I like the opportunity to talk to people about the history and really get in depth about it, but then I also like just having a bit of a laugh with people as well, and try and do some flashy shooting as well.
So hopefully they know the way. Right. I'm a little off to the left.
It's that annoying elevation as well. It's slightly higher.
Oh, I'm to the right. I've killed his friends behind him. I've dropped an arrow.
So he's not dead, but he's gone to the toilet.
That's for the bloke behind him.
Oh, he caught it on the back. There it is. First arrow.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you. No worries at all.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our trip around Warwick Castle. I've got to say, this is one heck of a place. Of all the castles I've toured, all the films I've done on castles, this rates as #1. It is where my heart still lies. Now, if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. But before I go, I'd like to give a shout out to some of my Patreon members. We've got Cindy Stott, Shane Hunter, and Richard Langalotti. Fabulous names. Hey guys, thanks a million, and bye for now.